Zie je Nederlands yet? Are English people actually Dutch? So continuing on from the concept of reality to creating the world around us. We create not just our own identity, but we also create the world around us, such as in terms of sociology. If you look at the internet, for example, sociology and technology is maybe the same as sociology. Technology is an aspect of sociology. It's interesting too, if you look at Marshall McLuhan posed the question, is the medium the message, or is the message the medium? That's interesting in relation to the idea of sociology and technology. But Ben Shapiro is Jewish, right? Ben Shapiro was born into a family, into a community, into a nation that identifies as being Jewish by a lineage of blood, right? Who am I to say otherwise? You know, I'm part of a trans community. I oiled my hair, and that's why I'm wearing this thing. I'm part of the T section of the LGBT, right? I'm part of a certain type of people who, some people call it a community, some people call it a spectrum. I don't know who does that, but who is someone like Ben Shapiro to tell me that I'm not what I am? Right? You know, Christians Christian themselves and become Christian. Muslims utter a sentence. Jews are born Jewish, right? You know, and whilst it may not be like that, like it may not actually be like that we are born all different, all, I don't know that we're all born identical either, but, you know, we create this reality of ours, kind of like as we go along. And it's even more so, more than just the individual. Transitioning, transgenderism, whatever you want to call it, is nothing new. Nothing new. If you look at Charles I, who was a King of England who asserted himself as having a level of power through divinity by blood. You know, the Constitution, the government of England, 1630 something, 1670 something, I can't remember, disagreed and took his life through capitation and established a different type of hierarchy between monarchy and government and constitution. They defined themselves. If you look at global warming, right, through a long period of time, we created global warming. Now we're actively trying to create the world around us again to push it backwards. Right? You know, in Buddhism they talk about the Brahmin. And so Shakyamuni was a Ćяэдтэ. He was a part of the warrior class. And there was strife going on between the Ćяэdtës and the Hindu Brahmins. So in Buddhism, it's said that you become a Brahmin. You're not born a Brahmin. In Hinduism, it's said that you are born Brahmin, one of the accusations the Buddhists made of the Hindus was that, you know, you're creating your own Vedics and creating your own hierarchy and placing yourself above the Ćяэдтэs, the warrior class. Shakyamuni renounced being a Ćяэдтэ and became what you would have classified then, because Buddhism and Hinduism were much more akin, as a Brahmin. He became a Brahmin. All of his followers became Brahmins. None of them became Brahmins through a sense of reincarnation. Today, Hinduism, and one of the things Shakyamuni would say would be something like, he would talk about a sacrifice. So in Hinduism, they would have this sacrifice where, probably because people were hungry, or hungry for something, you know, they would slaughter some goats or something, collect the blood, distribute the meat, and stuff like that. People would have something to eat. And then in Buddhism, you know, they would say, you're doing it all wrong. You want a bloodless sacrifice. You want a sacrifice of oneself. You want a sense of devotion. That's a sense of devotion. Because the idea in Buddhism is that it's wrong to kill. Nor do we say that there's a caste system, or that there's a certain level of hierarchy. Now, and then in Hinduism, but it's interesting too that Buddhists would also eat meat, you know, in that era. Actually, I don't know that Shakyamuni did, but I know that Theravada monastics who are older than Mahayana do eat meat. Whereas, you know, in Hinduism, now Hinduism isn't strictly vegan or vegetarian, but predominantly vegan vegetarian. And then Buddhism is also, Mahayana Buddhism today is largely predominantly vegan vegetarian. Right? You know, like, if you look at a person, I mean, the English are technically Dutch. The English language is technically a Germanic language, right? It's a Germanic language largely influenced with French. It's like a mishmash of French and German. So technically, Anglo-Saxons, Saxons, you know, technically, actually that's not, Saxons came later. But the Anglos who were from, I think from Germany, and identified as a sect of like, or peoples of Angles, moved into Brittany. Yet, like, everyone throughout history, you know, all the way throughout history, right down to my sheer, you know, what am I, right? Today in Canada, what am I? Am I an English person? I mean, I'm speaking English to you. Is English Dutch? Does that make me a Dutch person because I'm English? How about the French aspect? Because I'm also part French, you know, and I'm part French from, you know, partly from being English, partly from being born in Canada. English, French, Irish, and German. So I'm also part Celt. Celt, Bavarian, Gull, Anglo. Well, what is that? Well, it's what whoever defines it as. You know, do I define, you know, does that allow me to be Canadian? What does it make me? You know, some people who immigrate here, they'll talk to me and they'll say, you know, if you're Canadian, you know, and I'm like, am I? I don't feel Canadian. I don't feel like anything at all. It's really very, although if you took me out of Canada and put me into somewhere else like the US, you know, I might be like, oh, you know, hold the wagon. What the hell is up with this bullshit? Right? I was listening to Ideas, Nell Ayad, who's Muslim, and their director is Muslim, and they decided to be nice to me today. And they were talking about, they took this very basic idea of taking a relative thing like Christianity, a relative thing like Christmas. I was bitching to my mother that, you know, it does not feel like Christmas anymore. you know, and that it's just like I don't feel like I have an identity anymore, which there's an element of truth to. I don't even know what it is to be Canadian anymore, and yet some people call me Canadian. But and they were talking about, they took a very relative thing like Christmas, right? And they put it under the microscope of philosophy, you know, which is like something that I would do. And then they looked at it in terms of something like rights. You know, how are your rights intrinsic? Some may be, some may be not. That may be hard to define. But it made me think that, like, I'm getting over, like, I think Omicron or something, I don't know, or flu or cold or something. But it made me think, like, okay, what rights, what basic human rights are intrinsic? You know, and the idea being that, like, you know, we created Christmas, you know, and we propagate this idea to children that, you know, there's a Santa Claus, and that Santa Claus leaves presents and cookies, or Santa Claus eats cookies and all this jazz, right? You know, and then we destroy this. You know, do we owe them a present or something along that line because we created this? Apparently, Santa Claus hails from, like, Saint Nick, which hails from, like, an old Germanic aspect of Christmas. But Saint Nick became Santa Claus with Coca-Cola. If you look at all the Christmas music that's going on nowadays, from here to Timbuktu, you know, you get all of this really Americanized viewpoint of Christmas and Santa and things like that, right? And it's largely through commercialism. You know, Christmas, or Xmas as it's now often called, is largely commercial. It's almost more commercial and cultural in that sense. It's become larger and more cultural and global, you know, than its relation to Christianity, to some degree. You know, I don't identify as being somebody who's Christian, but I identify heavily with Christmas. And so my point being, you know, and he was talking about human rights. You know, what human rights are intrinsic? Do we have a basic obligation to children to propagate the story? And if we do we have a basic obligation to give them presents, kind of idea? And that spawning out to the idea of being like human rights. The thing about a society is, right, you know, we create the world that we live in, right? You know, the world dies and is born with the Brahmin kind of idea, if you want to look at it from a Buddhist point of view. Right? You know, we establish what is what, right? You know, Hindus say, you know, you're reincarnated as a Brahmin. Buddhists say you become a Brahmin, right? I say you become a Brahmin. I don't understand the reincarnation part. That doesn't make any sense to me. I'm much more pragmatic than that. But here's the thing, though, right? Like, you know, how society creates itself, right? How society presents itself in terms of something like human rights says, you know, how we create our world around us, you know, as, say, like as a nation, you know, or even as a planet, right, speaks volumes of us. You know, our idea of establishing something like human rights, basic human rights, in terms of something like identity, you know, Ben Shapiro is allowed to be Jewish. Why am I not allowed to identify as identify? Why am I not allowed to identify as being female? Right? You could say, well, you weren't born female, you're a biological male. I mean, you weren't born Jewish. Right? This is something that you and your community decided that this is how it is. Right? But this can easily be disproved. You know, however, is it not wrong of me to come and attack somebody's faith? or somebody's identity. So then why is it okay for somebody to come along and attack me for my identity? You know, you have your lived experiences as a Jewish person. I have my lived experiences, you know, as someone who transitioned. You know, you are allowed to have your identity. Why is it that I'm not allowed to have my identity? Like, what's next? Are you going to tell me that I'm not Canadian? Are you going to tell me that I'm not an English Canadian? Are you going to tell me that because I'm English, that being English has nothing to do with being French? Right? Or am I Dutch? Can I be part French and part Dutch? Because I'm speaking a Dutch derivative language, like Flemish. Flemish and English actually sound a lot alike. If you check it out, it's interesting. You know, I think it says a lot of a nation that allows, you know, people a level of identity. You know, when that identity becomes harmful, then you need to pull back on the reins a bit, right? But where is it like that me or somebody who's non-binary or someone like that is becoming harmful? I don't get it. You know, really what's going on with trans rights today is simply that there's a lot of conservatives out there, you know, like this Ben Shapiro guy. I'm 100% sure that this guy is just a sidekick to a politician. He's getting paid, you know, to present certain things in a certain way, you know, for the next upcoming election. Him and this, like, American Youth Foundation and Matt Walsh and all these guys, you know, all of their politics is geared to draw out your hate, draw out your hatred, right? And so it's wrong today, right? You know, it's wrong today to attack people who are homosexual, right? There's been, like, since like the 70s and the 80s and stuff like that, 60s, you know, there's been a huge wave of human rights in relation to being homosexual, right? Being gay. You know, you even have, like, in the 60s, in the 50s, you had gay balls, right? Where you had girls like me, you know, with dancing with dudes. You know, they would have these balls, have these parties. You know, it was an expression of identity, right? You know, and to say that, like, identity is fixed is also wrong. You know, like, when I first started transitioning, like, 5 years ago, right? It was like, you didn't... I come from, like, a generation that was like, you worked so hard, you know, you worked so hard on yourself to present, you know, and pass. Passing was so quintessential, you know, and as a part of my identity. You know, like, it was just like, why would you do this if you didn't? You know, why would you do this if you didn't have that level of dysphoria, right? And today it's like, today people, especially in the States, you know, identify as being transgender. Not female, transgender. You know, and then they'll say, oh, but transgender women are women. Okay, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that. You know, they'll talk about their transness and stuff like that. I'm like, trans what? No, we're not talking about that. And I don't pass 100%. You know, sometimes not. But I think when a society does things like establishes, you know, LGBT rights, you know, when a society starts doing things like banning conversion